The voicemail wasn't meant for me. I know that for a fact because it came in at 2:17 a.m. from a number I didn't recognize, and it started mid-sentence, like I'd walked into a room after the argument had already begun. "You promised me this would never come back on us," a man said, his voice tight and low. Then a woman answered. Her voice was calm, almost bored. "It won't, if you do exactly what I told you." I sat up in bed, phone pressed to my ear, listening to silence swallow the line. At first I assumed it was a wrong number. Drunk call. Scam. Nothing. I deleted voicemails like that all the time. But then I heard her breathing again, close to the mic. "And if he ever finds out," she said, "you know what happens." The call cut off. I stared at the ceiling for a long time after that, trying to convince myself my chest wasn't tight, that my heart wasn't pounding for no reason. I rolled over, checked the time again, and told myself to sleep. By morning, the voicemail was still there. I replayed it while brushing my teeth, while making coffee, while standing in the shower with water running down my face. Something about the woman's voice felt familiar. Not in a way I could place immediately, but in a way that made my skin prickle. It took me until the third replay to realize why. She sounded like my wife. Not exactly, but close enough that I couldn't ignore it. I didn't say anything to her that morning. She moved around the kitchen like she always did, hair still damp from the shower, humming softly while she packed her lunch. She kissed my cheek before leaving, told me she loved me, and walked out the door without a hint of tension. I stood there long after she left, coffee going cold in my hand. We'd been married 9 years, together for 12. No major fights, no scandals, no secrets that I knew of. We were the boring couple people joked about, steady, predictable, safe. That voicemail didn't belong in our life. I told myself I was being paranoid. That voices can sound similar. That stress can warp perception. That I needed to calm down. So I went to work. Around noon, the number called again. This time I answered. Hello. Silence. Then breathing. Controlled. Intentional. Who is this? I asked. A pause. Then the same man's voice from the voicemail. You shouldn't have answered, he said. My stomach dropped. Why are you calling me? I demanded. Do you have the wrong number? Another pause. Longer this time. No, he said quietly. I don't. Before I could say anything else, the line went dead. I sat at my desk staring at my phone, coworkers chatting around me, keyboards clacking, life moving on like nothing had just shifted under my feet. I tried calling a number back. Straight to voicemail. No name. No greeting. That afternoon, I did something I'd never done before. I went through my wife's things. Not in a dramatic way. No wholesome. No closet torn apart. I told myself I was just looking for reassurance. Something to prove I was overreacting. I checked her laptop first. Password protected. Same password she'd used for years. Nothing unusual in her browser history. Work emails. Shopping sites. Group chats with friends. Then her phone. I felt sick even picking it up. This wasn't us. We trusted each other. We didn't snoop. But the voicemail echoed in my head. I didn't go through messages. I didn't open photos. I checked one thing only. Recently deleted calls. There it was. The number. Called twice. Both times late at night. My hands shook as I set the phone down. That night, I didn't confront her. I watched her instead. The way she laughed at the TV. The way she scrolled on her phone, thumb moving quickly, eyes focused. The way she angled the screen away from me without realizing it. At one point, she looked up and smiled. You okay? You're quiet. Just tired, I said. She nodded, accepted it easily, and leaned her head against my shoulder. Her heartbeat was steady. Mine wasn't. The next day, the number texted me. Just one line. You deserve to know who you're married to. I stared at the screen for a full minute before replying. Then tell me. The response came almost immediately. Meet me. Tonight. Alone. A location followed. A coffee shop on the edge of town. One I'd never been to. I should have told my wife. I should have walked away. I should have blocked the number and pretended none of this existed. Instead, I agreed. I told my wife I was working late. She didn't question it. The coffee shop was nearly empty. Soft music. Dim lights. The kind of place where conversations dissolve into the hum of machines and whispered words. He was already there when I walked in. Mid-40s, neatly dressed, nervous hands wrapped around a paper cup. He looked up when he saw me and flinched slightly, like he'd expected someone bigger, angrier. "You came," he said. "You're the one who called me," I replied. "Start talking." He swallowed. "I didn't want to do this. I really didn't. But you did." He nodded. "Because she's about to do it again." My chest tightened. "Do what?" He leaned forward, voice dropping. "Destroy someone's life." I felt like the air had been sucked out of the room. "Explain." He hesitated, then pulled out his phone and slid it across the table. On the screen was a photo. Not of my wife. Of me, leaving my office. Time-stamped. Zoomed in. Then another. Me at a bar months ago, laughing with coworkers. Another. Me pumping gas. Me grocery shopping. Me walking our dog. "Why do you have these?" I asked. "I don't," he said. "She does." My ears rang. "Why?" He looked me straight in the eye. "Because she's building a case." "For what?" He exhaled slowly. "For when she decides to end it." I laughed once, sharp and hollow. "You're lying." "I wish I was," he said. "I've seen this before." My stomach churned. "Seen what?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he scrolled to another photo and turned the phone back toward me. It was a woman, younger, smiling, her arm wrapped around a man's waist. The man was him. "That was my wife," he said quietly. My throat went dry. "She did the same thing to me," he continued. "Played perfect, loving, loyal. Then one day she filed for divorce and accused me of things I never did. Things I couldn't prove I didn't do." I stared at the photo. "What does this have to do with my wife?" He met my gaze. "Your wife learned from her." The words didn't make sense. "Learned from who?" From behind the counter, the espresso machine hissed loudly, filling the silence. "My wife and yours," he said. "They worked together." I shook my head. "No, that's not possible. My wife's never. She used to." He cut in. "Different department. Different name. Same methods." My pulse roared in my ears. "Methods?" He leaned back, eyes tired. "Marry stable men. Build a spotless image. Slowly document everything. Twist nothing, just frame it. Then walk away clean while the other person burns." I stood up so fast my chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is insane." "I thought that too," he said calmly. "Until I lost my house. My job. Most of my friends. People glanced over. I lowered my voice. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because I saw your name on her screen last week," he said. "And I realized she's almost done with you." I felt dizzy. "Why warn me?" He looked down at his hands. "Because no one warned me." I left the cafe without another word. The drive home felt unreal, like I was watching someone else behind the wheel. Every memory of my marriage replayed in a new light. Every argument, every apology, every time she'd encouraged me to calm down or let things go. That night, I lay awake beside her, listening to her breathe, wondering how much of my life was real and how much was carefully curated. And for the first time since we met, I was afraid of the person sleeping next to me. Because if even half of what that man said was true, then I wasn't married to the woman I thought I was. I was living with someone who planned endings long before beginnings ever finished. I didn't sleep. Every time my wife shifted beside me, every time her breathing changed, my body tensed like I was pretending to be asleep while someone searched the room. I stared at the ceiling until it felt like it was pressing down on me, replaying the man's words again and again. "She's almost done with you." Morning came like an accusation. She woke up cheerful like always, made breakfast, asked if I wanted eggs or toast, kissed me goodbye before work. Her normalcy was almost impressive. If this was all an act, she'd been rehearsing it for years. I decided one thing on the drive to work. I wasn't confronting her yet. If she really was building a case, then reacting emotionally would be exactly what she wanted. I needed facts, proof, something solid enough that I wasn't just another paranoid husband about to blow up his own life. That afternoon, I took a sick day. Instead of going home, I went somewhere I hadn't been in years, the public records office. It felt stupid at first, like I was role-playing a detective in my own marriage. But the man at the cafe had been specific. He'd said different department, different name. So I searched. Marriage records, old addresses, employment filings, anything tied to her maiden name and the name before that. That's when I found it. A marriage license from 12 years ago. Her photo was unmistakable. Same eyes, same smile, different last name. Married to a man I'd never heard of. Divorced 3 years later. I dug deeper. Court documents don't tell stories, but they tell enough. Accusations, claims of emotional abuse, financial manipulation, fear for personal safety. The case ended in settlement. Confidential, clean, no criminal charges, no convictions. Just a man who lost everything and quietly disappeared. I sat there staring at the screen, my hands cold. This wasn't coincidence. I called the number again. This time, he answered. Yeah, he said like he'd been waiting. I saw the records, I said. There was another marriage before yours. He exhaled slowly. Then you're ahead of where I was. Why does she do this? I asked. Money. No, he said. Control. He told me more than he had at the cafe. How his wife, my wife's former co-worker, taught her how to document without lying. How to provoke reactions without witnesses. How to plant doubts gently, over time, until everyone already believed the story before it was ever told. They don't destroy you all at once, he said. They let you do it yourself. I drove home now. That night, I noticed everything. The way she casually asked where I'd been. The way she framed questions like concern instead of curiosity. The way she sighed softly when I didn't answer right away. Are you stressed? She asked. You've been off lately. There it was. The seed. I smiled. Forced it. Just work stuff. She nodded. Too easily. Over the next week, I stopped reacting. When she criticized, I agreed calmly. When she pushed, I stepped back. When she asked leading questions, I gave neutral answers. And something changed. She became restless. She started picking fights over nothing, leaving drawers open. Lights on. Small things meant to irritate. When I didn't take the bait, she escalated. One night, she accused me of hiding money. Another night, she joked about how distant I'd become and how people might misunderstand that. I started recording everything. Not secretly, not illegally, just keeping logs, dates, words, context. And then she made her first mistake. It happened at a dinner party. Friends, wine, laughter. She told a story about me losing my temper during an argument we'd had months ago. She exaggerated just enough that people went quiet. I smiled and said gently, that's not how it happened. Her eyes flicked to mine, just for a second. Oh, she said sweetly. Maybe I remember it wrong. Later that night, she exploded. You embarrassed me, she hissed in the kitchen. You made me look like a liar. I just corrected the story, I said calmly. She stared at me, something dark flashing behind her eyes. You're changing. So are you, I thought. A week later, she suggested therapy. Joint therapy. That was when I knew. This was the step before the fall. Therapy creates records, statements, impressions. I agreed, but only on one condition. My therapist, I said. She hesitated, just for a fraction of a second. Of course, she said. The therapist was someone I trusted, someone who listened carefully. And during the third session, my wife slipped again. She described an argument that never happened, claimed I'd said things I hadn't. The therapist asked gently, can you give an example? She paused, just a bit too long. I spoke up, calmly, with dates and details. No emotion, no accusations. The room shifted. For the first time, someone looked at her differently. That night, she didn't come home. No text, no call. At 3 a.m., I got a message from an unknown number. You think you're smarter than me. My heart pounded. You should have stayed quiet. I didn't reply. The next morning, she came home like nothing had happened. Smiled, apologized, said she'd stayed at a friend's place. I nodded. Inside, I was done pretending. I contacted a lawyer. A quiet one. A careful one. We didn't file anything. We prepared. Weeks passed. Then, one evening, she sat me down at the kitchen table. "I think we need to talk," she said softly. "I'm not sure this marriage is healthy for me anymore." There it was. I leaned back in my chair. "Okay." She blinked. "That's it. What would you like me to say?" Her jaw tightened. "I feel unsafe sometimes." The word hung between us. I reached into a folder and slid it across the table. Logs, records, therapy notes, screenshots, timelines. Her face drained of color. "What is this?" she whispered. "Insurance," I said. She stared at me, then laughed, a sharp, humorless sound. "You think this will save you?" "I think it will tell the truth," I replied. For the first time, she looked afraid. Not angry, not manipulative. Afraid. The divorce was quiet. No accusations. No courtroom drama. She left with what she brought. I kept my life. A month later, I heard she'd moved to another city. Different job. Different name. Starting over. Sometimes I still think about how close I came to losing everything without ever knowing why. How many people never get a warning? So here's what I want to know, and be honest when you answer. If you discovered the person you trusted most had been quietly planning your downfall for years, would you confront them immediately, or would you do what I did and play the long game? Tell me in the comments what you would have done. I didn't realize I was being watched until the silence started feeling intentional. At first, it was small things. My phone would stop buzzing the moment I entered a room. Conversations would end just before I joined them. People at work would look at me with a kind of polite distance, like they already knew something about me that I didn't. I told myself I was overthinking it. Stress does that to you. Long hours, bad sleep, too much caffeine. But then my access badge stopped working. I stood there one morning, tapping it against the scanner again and again, while people flowed past me into the office. The security guard checked his screen, frowned, and told me to wait. "Probably a system glitch," he said. That phrase would come back to haunt me. HR called me in that afternoon. They didn't accuse me of anything. That was the strange part. They just asked questions. Calm, neutral questions. About my behavior, my workload, my interactions with others. "Has anyone mentioned concerns about you?" One of them asked gently. I laughed. "No. Should they?" They exchanged a look. When I left the room, my stomach felt hollow. By the end of the week, I was pulled off my main project. By the end of the month, I was temporarily reassigned to a role with no real responsibilities. People stopped asking for my input. Emails went unanswered. Meetings happened without me. It was like I was slowly being erased. The only person who still acted normal was Aaron. Aaron was my closest friend at work. We joined the company around the same time. Same team. Same late nights. Same complaints about management. We'd celebrated promotions together, complained about pay together, even joked about quitting together. If something was wrong, he'd know. So I asked him. We sat in my car after work, engine off, the city humming around us. "Do you feel like something's off?" I asked. He hesitated just a beat too long. "Not really," he said. "What?" "I feel like people are avoiding me." He shrugged. "Maybe you're just in your head, man. You've been tense lately." There it was again. Tense. Stressed. Off. The same words HR had used. I went home that night and opened my laptop. I started digging through old emails, Slack messages, project logs. I wasn't sure what I was looking for. Just something that proved I wasn't imagining this. That's when I found the first crack. An email thread about a delayed deadline. A delay I remembered clearly. The client had changed requirements last minute. Everyone knew that. Except in the email summary sent to management, the blame landed squarely on me. The sender? Aaron. My chest tightened. I told myself it was a mistake. A miscommunication. I even drafted a message to him asking about it, then deleted it. Something felt wrong. Over the next few days, I noticed more. Meeting notes where my objections were framed as resistance. Decisions I'd warned against were described as approved by the team. Casual jokes I'd made were written down as unprofessional remarks. Always subtle, always just believable enough, and always coming from the same person. I confronted him lightly at first. "Hey, I noticed that email about the delay," I said one afternoon. It kind of made it sound like it was on me. He smiled apologetically. "Oh man, I was rushing. You know how it is. Didn't mean anything by it." I wanted to believe him. But then something happened that shattered that illusion completely. A coworker I barely spoke to pull me aside near the coffee machine. "Hey," she said quietly. "Just be careful, okay?" "About what?" She looked around, then back at me. I probably shouldn't say anything. My heart started pounding. "Say what?" She lowered her voice. "There's talk about you. That you've been difficult. That you don't take feedback well. That you're unstable sometimes." I felt like I'd been slapped. "Who's saying that?" She hesitated. "It's mostly coming from one place." She didn't need to say his name. That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every conversation, every moment of trust, every time I'd vented to Aaron, every frustration I'd shared in confidence. All that information weaponized. I realized something terrifying. This wasn't random. This wasn't office politics spiraling out of control. This was deliberate, and whoever was doing it knew me well. The next week, my manager called me in again. "This isn't a formal warning," he said, hands folded carefully. "But there are concerns about your attitude." "Concerns from who?" I asked. He paused. "Multiple sources." I nodded slowly, even though my hands were shaking. After work, I sat alone in my apartment, staring at the wall. I could feel my reputation slipping through my fingers, and the worst part was how invisible it all was. No single accusation I could fight. No clear enemy I could point to. Just a narrative being quietly built around me. That's when I made a decision. If someone was rewriting my story, I needed to see the drafts. I started documenting everything. Screenshots, dates, context, who said what and when. I stopped venting, stopped reacting. I became neutral, polite, boring. And I watched. Aaron started getting bolder. He'd check in on me constantly, ask how I was holding up, offer advice I hadn't asked for. "You know," he said one day, leaning against my desk, "people worry when you get quiet like this." I looked up at him. "Do they?" "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm just looking out for you." I smiled back. Inside, something hardened, because now I knew the truth. My downfall wasn't coming from a faceless system or a toxic boss. It was coming from the one person I trusted most. And if he thought I was going to sit quietly while he buried me alive, he had no idea what was coming next. Once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. Every interaction with Aaron suddenly felt staged, like he was performing a role he'd practiced for a long time. Concerned friend, helpful teammate, reasonable voice in the room. Meanwhile, behind the scenes, he was shaping a version of me that didn't exist. I kept my head down and played along. At work, I became invisible on purpose. I spoke only when spoken to. I followed instructions exactly. I stopped correcting people, even when I knew they were wrong. Especially when I knew they were wrong. Aaron noticed. "You've changed," he said one evening as we walked out together. "You used to be more passionate." I shrugged, just trying to stay in my lane. He nodded slowly, like he'd just confirmed something. What he didn't know was that while I was quiet on the surface, I was collecting proof underneath. I went back months. Old Slack exports, archived emails, version histories of documents, meeting recordings no one remembered existed. It was tedious, boring work, but little by little, a picture formed. Aaron wasn't just throwing me under the bus. He was climbing over me. Every major win he'd had recently traced back to work I'd started. Ideas I'd pitched. Risks I'd flagged that he later heroically fixed. In several cases, he'd privately opposed decisions in chats with me, then publicly supported them while crediting himself for the outcome. The most disturbing part wasn't the ambition. It was the precision. He knew exactly how far to push without triggering alarms. He never lied outright. He reframed, omitted, emphasized just enough to tilt perception. He'd praise me just before subtly questioning my reliability. He'd agree with me privately, then say in meetings, I know there were concerns, but I think we can move forward. Always positioning himself as the calm counterweight to my supposed instability. I needed something undeniable, something that couldn't be waved away as miscommunication. Then I got lucky. A client escalation came in late on a Friday. Serious enough that leadership demanded a full audit trail by Monday. Every decision, every message, every handoff, Aaron volunteered to help coordinate. That was his mistake, because for the first time, everything had to be laid out in order. I worked all weekend reconstructing the timeline. Not just what happened, but who said what at each step. I attached raw messages, screenshots, document versions with timestamps. I resisted the urge to editorialize. I let the facts speak. By Sunday night, the story was clear, and it didn't match the narrative management had been hearing. On Monday morning, we presented. Aaron went first. Confident, polished. He walked through the situation the same way he always did, subtly positioning himself as the steady hand who'd kept things from falling apart. It was my turn. I didn't accuse him. I just asked questions. Can we pull up the initial requirements email? Here's the version history of the document. You'll notice the changes were made after the approval date. I just want to clarify something. In this message, the risk was acknowledged. The decision to proceed anyway came from here. The room got quiet. Someone asked Aaron to explain. He laughed it off at first. Oh, that? Yeah, that was a quick back and forth. Easy to lose track. So I pulled up the chat log. Then another. Then another. Each one showed the same thing. He'd been warned. He'd agreed. And later, he'd reframed those same decisions as mine. I watched the realization spread across the table. Not outrage. Something worse. Discomfort. My manager leaned back in his chair. Aaron, he said slowly, why wasn't this context included in your earlier summaries? Aaron opened his mouth. Closed it. For the first time since I'd known him, he looked unsure. I didn't think it was relevant, he said. Silence. After the meeting, HR asked me to stay. This time, the questions were different. How long have you noticed this? Why didn't you come forward sooner? Do you have documentation for the other examples you mentioned? I handed them everything. Over the next 2 weeks, things moved fast. Aaron was temporarily relieved of his leadership responsibilities pending review. People who'd avoided me started reaching out again, awkwardly, apologetically. One coworker admitted, I feel really stupid now. We just believed him. I didn't feel vindicated. I felt tired. The final meeting came on a Thursday afternoon. HR, my manager, someone from legal. They told me Aaron had resigned. No announcement. No explanation. Just gone. That night, he texted me. I never meant for it to go this far. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I replied, neither did I. We never spoke again. My role was restored. My reputation slowly repaired. But something fundamental had changed. I stopped assuming closeness meant safety. I stopped sharing vulnerabilities at work. I learned how quietly someone can dismantle you while smiling to your face. Sometimes I wonder how many people out there are being erased the same way, just without the luck or timing to catch it. Looking back now, I still ask myself the same question. If you were in my place, would you have confronted him sooner, or would you have waited until you had proof strong enough to end it for good? The first thing that bothered me wasn't the email. It was the silence after it. No replies, no reactions, no side messages asking what happened. Just a clean, empty gap where my name used to carry weight. That was the moment I realized something was very wrong, even before I understood what had been done to me. 2 weeks earlier, my life was normal. Busy, sure, but stable. I had a job I worked hard for, a small but loyal circle at work, and a reputation built slowly over years. I wasn't the loudest person in the room, but when I spoke, people listened. That mattered to me more than titles. Then everything started slipping in ways that didn't make sense. It began with small things. Meetings I wasn't invited to. Decisions being made without my input, even though they directly affected my work. A project I'd led for months suddenly reassigned temporarily. My manager started replying slower, shorter, neutral, almost scripted. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I'd missed something. Maybe I'd rubbed someone the wrong way without realizing it. I replayed conversations in my head late at night, searching for mistakes that weren't there. Then came an email. It was sent to leadership, HR, and copied to half the department. A formal message, polite language, carefully chosen words. It said there had been ongoing concerns about my professionalism, my communication style, and my ability to work collaboratively. It claimed multiple people had raised issues. It said an internal review was being considered. No examples, no names, no chance to respond before it went out. I read it 3 times before it sank in. Someone was building a version of me that didn't exist. My hands were shaking, but not from fear, from confusion. I genuinely didn't understand how we'd gotten here. I hadn't yelled at anyone. I hadn't missed deadlines. I hadn't done anything reckless. If anything, I'd been the one smoothing things over, fixing problems quietly so leadership wouldn't have to deal with them. I walked to the bathroom, locked myself in a stall, and sat there longer than I'd like to admit, just staring at the floor. When I came back, my desk felt different, like it no longer belonged to me. People avoided eye contact. Conversations stopped when I walked by. One coworker gave me a look that mixed sympathy and distance, like I'd already been written off. I asked my manager for a meeting. He agreed, but only for 15 minutes. That should have been my second warning. He sat across from me with his laptop open, fingers resting on the keyboard like he might need to escape at any moment. He didn't ask how I was. He didn't explain the email. He just said, "We need to address some concerns." I asked him what those concerns were. He hesitated. "Well," he said slowly, "there's feedback that you can be difficult to work with." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so vague it felt unreal. "From who?" I asked. He shifted in his chair. "I can't share specifics." "What did I do?" I pressed. "Give me one concrete example." Another pause. "It's more about patterns," he said. Patterns. The word people use when they don't have facts. I left that meeting knowing 2 things. First, that defending myself emotionally would only make things worse. Second, that someone had been laying groundwork for a long time. I just didn't know who yet. Over the next few days, the pressure intensified. HR reached out just to talk. Meetings were documented. Casual chats turned formal. I noticed phrases from the email being repeated back to me, like talking points that had already been agreed upon. That's when I realized this wasn't spontaneous. It was coordinated. I started paying attention to who benefited from my absence, who stepped into meetings I used to lead, who suddenly had opinions on projects they'd never touched before. One name kept appearing. Liam. We'd worked together for over a year. Same level, same team, friendly, but not close. He was charming in a low-effort way, always agreeable, always supportive in public. He'd often message me privately saying things like, "You're right, but maybe don't push too hard," or "Management doesn't always like hearing that." I'd taken that as advice. Now it felt like a warning I hadn't understood. I went back through old messages. Slowly, carefully. I wasn't looking for betrayal yet. I was looking for inconsistencies. What I found instead was subtle brilliance. Liam never criticized me outright. He framed concerns as questions. He'd agree with my points, then gently suggest alternatives in group chats, positioning himself as flexible and me as rigid. He'd volunteer to help clarify my ideas, then rephrase them just enough to remove my voice. At the time, I thought he was being collaborative. Now, with the email hanging over my head, it looked different. I checked timestamps, messages where I'd flagged risks, followed hours later by Liam telling leadership he'd identified potential concerns, threads where I proposed solutions, then watched him summarize them in meetings without mentioning my name. The most unsettling part was how long it had gone on. This wasn't a reaction to something I'd done recently. This was a campaign. I didn't confront him. Not yet. I needed to be sure. And more importantly, I needed to understand how deep it went. I started documenting everything: screenshots, calendar invites, version histories. I kept a private timeline, noting when narratives shifted and who introduced them. I stayed calm in meetings, polite, measured. I stopped giving opinions unless asked directly. Liam, meanwhile, became more visible, more confident. He started speaking on my behalf. I know there were some concerns from Opie, he'd say, but I think we've addressed them. Addressed them how? No one asked. One afternoon, HR scheduled a follow-up. This time, they asked if I felt supported by my peers. That question changed everything. It told me this wasn't just about performance anymore. It was about perception, about whether people felt safe around me. I realized then that if I didn't change the story soon, I wouldn't get the chance later. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about how easy it is to erase someone without ever raising your voice. How reputation, once cracked, doesn't shatter loudly. It just leaks out slowly until there's nothing left. By morning, I made a decision. I wasn't going to argue my innocence. I was going to expose the narrative itself. But to do that, I needed one thing I didn't have yet: proof that couldn't be reframed. And I was running out of time. By the time the sun came up, I had already accepted something uncomfortable. If I tried to clear my name the normal way, I would lose. Because this wasn't about facts anymore. It was about momentum. And Liam had it. What people don't tell you about workplace betrayal is that it doesn't feel dramatic at first. There's no shouting, no big reveal. It feels like slowly suffocating in a room where everyone insists the air is fine. I went into the office that day with a plan, but I kept it invisible. First, I stopped reacting. No defensiveness, no over-explaining, no emotional corrections. Every time someone repeated a vague concern, I nodded and said, "I understand." Every time Liam spoke for me, I thanked him publicly. That confused him. Predators expect resistance. Silence makes them careless. While he grew comfortable, I started collecting something far more valuable than screenshots: patterns with witnesses. I began looping people into conversations subtly. Instead of messaging Liam directly about work like before, I included others. When he rephrased my ideas, I followed up with written summaries sent to the entire group. Calm, professional, time-stamped. Just recapping my earlier recommendation so we're aligned. No acquiescence, just clarity. Slowly, the fog began thinning. One coworker pulled me aside near the coffee machine. She didn't say much. Just, "Hey, I noticed something. You okay?" I smiled and said I was fine. That was the moment I knew perception was shifting again. The turning point came unexpectedly. HR scheduled a mediation session. Me, Liam, a facilitator. He walked in relaxed, almost bored. He thought this was a formality, a step toward pushing me out cleanly. The facilitator asked him to explain his concerns. Liam spoke smoothly. He talked about tone, collaboration, energy. He used words that sound serious, but mean nothing. He said he often felt like he had to manage around me. Then it was my turn. I didn't defend myself. I asked a question. "Can you give a specific example, with a date, where I behaved unprofessionally?" Liam blinked. He gave a vague story. "No dates. No weaknesses." I nodded. Then I opened my laptop. I shared my screen. I showed a project timeline where I'd flag a risk weeks before it became an issue. I showed a follow-up email where Liam presented that same concern as his own. I showed a meeting summary where he referenced team discomfort hours after a private disagreement we'd had. Then I did something that changed the room. I stopped talking. Silence stretched. The facilitator leaned forward. "Liam, were these concerns documented anywhere prior to this?" He shifted in his chair. "Well, no, but..." And I added calmly, "Can you explain why feedback attributed to multiple people appears in language identical to messages you sent privately?" That's when the mask cracked. Not dramatically, not explosively, just enough. HR didn't accuse him. They didn't need to. They asked follow-up questions. Specific ones. The kind that don't allow generalities. The meeting ended with a promise to review things internally. Liam didn't look at me when we left. Over the next week, the atmosphere changed again. Meetings I was excluded from suddenly included me. Leadership asked for my input directly. Someone quietly reassigned one of my projects back to me for continuity. No one apologized. They never do. But Liam's influence evaporated. His ideas stopped being echoed. His messages went unanswered longer. He was no longer the translator between me and management. 2 weeks later, HR closed the review. No action required. That was the phrase they used. But here's what mattered more. Liam stopped talking to me entirely. Not because he was angry, because he knew. He knew I saw him clearly now, and that the story he tried to write had failed. The strange thing is, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, because winning like this doesn't come with applause. It comes with clarity, the understanding that professionalism can be weaponized, and that sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who never raise their voice. A month later, Liam transferred teams. Another month after that, he left the company. No announcement, no goodbye email, just gone. Sometimes I wonder how many times this worked for him before it didn't. How many people didn't have the energy, or the timing, or the luck to catch it early. I still work there. I still do my job. But I trust differently now. I document everything. I don't assume good intentions mean harmless ones. And when someone tells me I'm difficult, I ask them to be specific. If you were in my place, would you have confronted him sooner, or played it quietly like I did? And do you think exposing the pattern was the right move, or would you have handled it differently? If stories like this resonate with you, staying around and sharing your perspective helps more people than you think.